since this is
Perfect.
a HYLF event. So for all of you who are joining us here today, thank you. Welcome to, this is the first of the HYLF fellows, trustees, CLE events that we're trying to put on this year. So to introduce myself, my name is Daniel O'Neill. So I'm at Thompson Co. in the professional liability division. I am a HYLF trustee. It's my third year as a trustee with HYLF. So Miriam Anna and I are the co-chairs of the HYLF Fellows Committee this bar year. We are running the CLE program through the Fellows Committee. So some of the topics that Miriam and I are trying to bring through the committee this year, we're taking a look at board leadership. We're taking a look at pro bono involvement in the community. We're taking a look at some of the kind of pressing topics that are young lawyers, people involved in both the HYLA and HYLF side are seeing. So it's really kind of a comprehensive look at currently, what the fellows and trustees are taking a look at, as well as kind of an eye towards the future of, community spirit, community involvement. So this topic definitely seemed kind of right up our alley. So we are delighted to have an amazing speaker here with us today. Ronnie, is it okay if we do kind of introductions, or do you want us to give another couple minutes for people to filter in?
I'm good with whatever you'd like to do. We want to respect people's time, so.
Definitely. Well, it seems like we got a pretty good group so far. So yeah, just to let y'all know, one more thing about the foundation, then we'll do introductions. So this is our first kickoff event for the year. Our second is coming up on October 17th. So that is being presented by Amy Farish at Yetter Coleman. She is going to be presenting on October 17th about pro bono involvement, opportunities, guidance, leadership, all those great kind of topics. So if y'all are interested, the target audience is nonprofit community leaders, the HYLA board, the HYLA Leadership Academy, the HYLF trustees, anybody who thinks that they would really like to hear about some of the great nonprofit work that is being done, through various pro bono opportunities. We hope y'all will join us for the second one. So thank you all for being here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker. So the majority of the presentation is going to be presented by Dr. Ronnie Hagerty, Assistant Vice President of Community Relations at the United Way of Greater Houston. You all will hear from me at the very end of the presentation. I'm going to talk about what my day job is, representing nonprofit directors and officers. This is going to be an ethics case study we're going to talk about. So that's going to be, practical application about some of the things that Ronnie's going to talk about here today. Okay, so Ronnie oversees community outreach and leadership development initiatives, including the Nonprofit Connection and Project Blueprint, a program that prepares emerging leaders in ethnic communities for board service. In addition, she's assumed responsibility for United Way's talent management initiative. Prior to her transition to the nonprofit sector, Dr. Hagerty was a consultant with New York and Houston advertising and marketing firms. She was appointed by the governor of Texas to serve as board chair for the One Star National Service Commission. She also serves on the boards of the Rose and the Junior League of Houston Sustainer Organization. She holds a BA in journalism from St. Mary's College, Notre Dame, an MBA from the University of Houston Graduate School of Business, and a doctoral degree from Antioch University. She's also credentialed as a certified fundraising executive. She's a lecturer at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, and also an adjunct professor at the Jones Graduate School of Business at Rice University. We have been looking forward to this presentation for a long time. Ronnie, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Welcome, everyone. I can't see you, but it's good to know that you're here. And I really appreciate the chance to talk about board leadership. A good bit of the work that I do through the Nonprofit Connection is working with area nonprofit boards. And as some wise person once said, when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. I think the challenge is that very often people accept board leadership opportunities without having really much of a sense of what they have signed on for. It's, I think, especially appropriate to have this conversation with HYLF because board service is a serious legal responsibility. And that often comes as a surprise to people who thought it was a good networking opportunity, a way to enhance their resume, to build skills. All of those are legitimate reasons to serve on board. But the bottom line is it's a serious legal responsibility. So I think it's important to give you some context before we get started in terms of when we talk about the nonprofit sector, what exactly are we referencing? So there are nearly 2 million nonprofits in the United States. Texas is second only to California in terms of the number of nonprofits, and that number increases by as much as 10% annually. Here in the Houston metro area, it's estimated that there are more than 32,000 nonprofit organizations. There are approximately 24 categories of 501c something or others. Those are all IRS designated tax exempt organizations. My focus, and probably yours if you're going to be serving on a board, is typically with 501c3s. Probably a third of that 32,000 are educational charitable organizations that fall into that C3 category. So what does tax exempt really mean? We throw the term around a lot. You can, the first step in starting a nonprofit organization is to register with the state. And it's simply a checkbox. You check for-profit or nonprofit. And that, in many instances, causes people to think that they are officially able to raise money, which is accurate, and to provide tax deductions, which is inaccurate. It is that extra filing with the IRS that makes you eligible to provide tax deductions for your supporters. So we're exempt from state and property taxes. We do not pay corporate income taxes. And when we are purchasing goods, we don't pay state and local sales taxes. However, we are not exempt from payroll taxes. And more than a few nonprofits have gotten themselves in trouble when the board said, you know, our cash flow isn't very good this month. We're running a little bit short on revenue. Let's just not pay payroll taxes. Well, that's not a good idea. I think there's still very much the perception that the rules don't apply to nonprofits, and yes, they do. So payroll withholding taxes, very important. We do pay sales tax on goods sold. So if you're involved with an organization that's selling t-shirts, perhaps it's a thrift store, any other sort of profit-making venture, you have an auction and you are selling goods at auction, we are required to collect sales tax in those instances and to pay our duly appointed taxes to the state. There is also another category of income tax, which is called unrelated business income tax, or UBIT, that a nonprofit may be required to pay if indeed it is operating a profit-making venture, which is perfectly legal, and it generates sufficient revenue beyond a certain threshold. There are a number of other conditions associated with UBIT, in which case the organization may not have to pay tax, and that might be a thrift store, the Memorial Assistance Ministries, Northwest Assistance Ministries, where in many cases they're staffed by volunteers. The money is poured back into the organization. It's a rather complex set of criteria, and so you wouldn't want to guess at it without verifying the status with a financial professional. So really and truly, what do boards do? Well, it all begins with the mission, and then beyond that, I can tell you in a sentence, we are required as a board member to set the strategic direction for the organization and make sure you have the human and financial resources needed to achieve that direction. In addition to that, you are an advocate for the organization. If you're in the for-profit world, quite often you have field sales marketing teams that go out and about promoting the organization, prompting people to purchase the organization or to purchase the product or purchase the services. We tend not to have that luxury. So board members are the advocates that out and about in the community, they are representing the organization, telling the story. So it all starts with the mission. When you're thinking about joining a board, or if you are on the board of an organization, one of the first questions that you might have is, so what's the mission of the organization? Who are you and what do you do? Vision is the big dream, the BHAG. What is it if you are successful with your mission that you hope to accomplish. How will the community be better? How will the people that you serve be different? How will their lives be changed? How will the organization be different? And strategy is what takes you from mission to vision. So first of all, what is the mission? Describes what the organization does, why you exist. All decisions are based on the mission. We call it the guardrail, so that when organizations are considering funding opportunities or new programs or new directions, the first question is, how does it fit the mission? Mission creep is not uncommon in the nonprofit world. It typically is associated with chasing money. So it may be that you have a seniors program and you discover that there is some wonderful funding coming down from the feds on English as a second language, and you think, well, we really need to go after that money. Well, maybe not. It's hard perhaps to imagine how that particular funding would support your current mission. It might work, but it's definitely a question you want to ask. The mission is unique. You shouldn't be able to cross out anyone else's name and put the name of your organization in there. So, for example, I often hear missions that go something like this. Well, we want to improve the quality of life in Houston. Well, I think all of those 32,000 organizations want to do that. So what is it that sets your organization apart? It could be a geographic distinction. It could be the population that you serve, the type of program. You want it to be brief, memorable, compelling, and it should fit on a t-shirt. If it's longer than that, it's probably too long. One of the first things I do when I do a board retreat is ask, what's your mission? And more often than not, there is dead silence. That board members look at each other, they look at the executive director in the hopes that the exec will be able to pull the mission out of a notebook somewhere. If you don't know the mission, how can you represent the organization to the public? The vision is, where are you trying to go? It should be aspirational and inspirational. It's not what you're doing now, but it's possible. It's a stretch, but that is what often engages people, because it really causes them to think that would be amazing if we could do something like that. So this is a very old example, but it's pretty appropriate for Houston. That in John Kennedy's inaugural address, he stated that America would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Well, at that point, there was no space program, there was no NASA, no Johnson Space Center. The Russians had a space program, but our country did not. And that vision was so inspiring that we actually did accomplish that goal. And that's the goal of a vision for any organization. So what is it exactly that as a board member you are supposed to do? We have, from a legal perspective, if you found yourself in a court of law as a board member, it would probably have to do with the duties of care, loyalty, or obedience. And as attorneys, I think you would be particularly interested in this aspect of board service. So the duty of loyalty, what does that really mean? It simply means that while you are representing this organization, you are acting exclusively in the best interest of the organization. So all organizations should be signing a conflict of interest statement. Houston is a big, small town. It's not uncommon to have conflicts. You might serve on multiple boards. You might have family members that are vendors for the organization. It's not the conflict that's the issue. It is the failure to disclose that conflict so that you can recuse yourself from discussions or decisions regarding that conflict. As you serve that organization, it is imperative that you gain no personal benefit by virtue of that organization, or the IRS calls it private annulment. So whether it's a private school and you're trying to have somebody cut you some slack when your child did not pass the test and you want to get them into the school, perhaps it's a thrift store and you happen to be shopping there and you see this amazing piece of art and you go to the desk and you say, you know, I'm a board member, you really should cut me some slack on the price on this. That's personal benefit, and that is against the law. The duty of care is pretty straightforward. It is the ordinary prudent person standard that you hear about all the time, that it requires that you participate, you attend meetings, you review the minutes, you review documents in preparation for board meetings, you participate in a discussion, and you vote. It's very straightforward. What happens quite often is that you have board members who actually don't bother to attend meetings, who really don't pay much attention to the transactions that are underway. And then something goes bump in the night and all board members are held responsible, whether you attended meetings or not. So that participation element is pretty important. And if your schedule is such that you can't do it, my advice is resign from the board, take a sabbatical, but don't continue to have that legal risk if you're not going to be an active participant. The duty of obedience, what does that mean? It means that as the guarding the mission is first and foremost, that avoiding mission creep, and then making sure that you're in compliance with the laws of the city, county, state, and nation in which you operate. So if you own a building and you have an elevator, you need an elevator permit. If you have a working kitchen like the Beacon Homeless Project, you make sure that the city health department comes and inspects the kitchen. If you have drivers, they have valid driver's license. Again, what are the relevant laws that apply to your particular organization? And very often, board members are extremely comfortable deferring to the nonprofit staff in terms of those kind of concerns. And it's a good idea once a year to do a bit of a risk assessment to see whether you are indeed in compliance. The bylaws are the basic regulations that should govern everything that the organization does. And you might be surprised how frequently organizations are not in compliance with their bylaws. In theory, they are violating the law. They could lose their nonprofit status by so doing. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. A really good example is when COVID hit and everything went virtual, a lot of organizations did not have permission to meet electronically or to conduct electronic voting. And again, in theory, any of the votes that were taken virtually without that as an element in their bylaws were not valid. And so there are some organizations that are having to go back and play catch up. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And Daniel, I'll ask if you will monitor that so that I can answer as we go. I think some just additional things to keep in mind. Ignoring the laws that relate to tax exempt, and that's really not that hard because in many cases it's the same laws that govern every business. Bylaws should be reviewed periodically. I think every 2 years is probably a good standard. I like to say we should review the bylaws after the state legislature meets because quite often they come up with new regs that apply to nonprofits, and if we're not paying attention, we can suddenly find ourselves out of compliance. The conversation, if you're doing your duty of care, should be within the boardroom. That all too often you have board members who sit and fold their arms and shake their heads and are very unhappy with what is being discussed in the meeting and then have parking lot conversations. That is not productive for the organization. And it really defeats the whole purpose of having meetings in the first place. We are recognizing increasingly our failure to diversify our boards of directors, that about 70% of all nonprofit board members are white and about that same number are over 50. So we have a huge challenge on our hands when you think about making sure that our boards reflect the communities that we serve. So if you just take that 32,000 nonprofit organizations, each one of them is required by law to have a minimum of 3 board members. It gives you a sense of how important board recruitment is. And when we're recruiting board members, sometimes organizations are very random to say, hey, we've got some empty seats on our board. Does anybody know anybody? We've got to have an election coming up. We need to fill those seats. Let's do it. As opposed to really having a board composition strategy where they look at the current membership and they say, who's on our board now? What are we missing? Do we need somebody who's got some HR experience? We definitely need an attorney. We need a CPA, somebody who's good at social media, somebody who's good at marketing. So again, who's on the board? And it really is up to the board members themselves to be responsible for that recruitment. Taking minutes, making sure that you document the, excuse me, your votes and the actions that are taken in the course of the meeting. Looking at your programs. So are you continuing to do things the way you've always done them? If these last 3 years post-COVID haven't taught us anything, it's that things change quickly. And perhaps the way we were doing things in the past are not as effective now, that many organizations that had to shift to virtual services are finding that they work better for clients. Counseling, for example, that it really is a much better strategy than the traditional way of doing it, because they find out that clients don't have to worry about childcare, they don't have to worry about transportation. And then I think another risk with nonprofits is that you are invited to serve on a board. You find a very competent nonprofit executive, CEO, executive director, whatever the title is, and you're very trusting. Nonprofits get into trouble all the time because we're nice people and we're trying to do good things, and we think that things are going along really nicely. But if you're not annually reviewing the work of the organization and looking at the performance of the CEO, you're really not providing your duty of care. So I talked about setting the strategic direction. That's what is the vision? It's a good idea to look at the mission every couple of years and say, does that still describe what we're doing? What are the values? What is important to the organization? I mean, it's a standard strategic planning process, the SWOT analysis, prioritizing goals and objectives. I am someone who, when I do a strategic plan, I don't want to see more than 3 or 4 goals. We used to talk about 5 and 10-year plans. That is not practical any longer. So we're looking at 1 year short term and maybe 2 or 3 years longer term. But with a volunteer board, and all of you who would be serving on a board would be volunteers, you're not going to be able to accomplish 20 goals and 37 objectives. It's what are the 3 or 4 things that really need to happen this year? What do we really need to focus on? And what are the resources available? That it's kind of fun to brainstorm and blue sky and think about all the possibilities. But at the end of the day, what can we actually do? All too often, board members have a board retreat. They spend a morning or a morning and an afternoon developing some exciting new plans, some goals that are really position the organization for an exciting future, but they never get far enough to say, okay, who's going to do what, by when, how much is it going to cost, and what is the desired outcome? What does success look like? What are we really trying to accomplish here? Is it feasible? One of your really important responsibilities as a board member is supporting it with your personal financial resources and your enthusiasm and ability to engage others in the work of the organization. So we talked about being an advocate for the organization, promoting its mission. I am a firm believer that every board member needs to be prepared to make a personal gift. Now, what I hear often is, well, I give my time. Do you know how much my time is worth? I'm sure that for an attorney, that would be a reasonable question. And yes, I do understand how much your time is worth. But the reality is, if you have no financial skin in the game, you really do not have the same level of engagement with that organization. And I use sort of the stock market as an example. So I have an iPhone. Probably a lot of you have some Apple product that you use. I'm not an investor. I just have the phone. And all I care about is that the phone works. I don't look at the annual stock performance. I might look at the Wall Street Journal once in a while. I might read an article about an Apple if one shows up, but I'm really not paying much attention. I have no skin in that game. I just want the phone to work. If you have skin in the game, you are going to be paying close attention to the performance of that organization. Increasingly, we have learned that most of our local foundations will not invest in an organization that doesn't have 100% board participation. And it just makes good sense. You are expected to support the organizational activities, events, special programs. Perhaps you are invited to come and watch some of the clients and visit with them and learn what their experience has been. Sharing your networks is not just about money. It is really introducing other people to the organization. Who do you know that might be interested in the work of the organization? How can you connect a much broader circle to build the long-term sustainability of the organization? We like to think about your supporting donor cultivation. Fundraising is really sales and marketing. And some people are very comfortable with the idea of selling. and others are never going to be. But there are lots of ways that you could participate in solicitation, and a good bit of that might be just setting up a coffee with somebody, or in having a lunch with the executive director and maybe another board member and a new prospective board member or prospective donor. And you can't thank people enough. Think about yourself when someone says thank you and says it more than once, it kind of makes you feel good. And when you're thinking about fundraising on behalf of an organization, it really makes sense to think about, how do you feel when you make a contribution to an organization that you really care about? It really makes you feel good. So when you are not willing to share that opportunity with others, in a way, you're really denying them a chance to feel like, yeah, that was kind of nice to make a difference like that. Talked about why board giving matters. It really makes a public statement that you are committed to this organization. Again, if you're an investor, you're more likely to pay attention to the outcomes of the work of the organization, and funders are not likely to give if they don't have 100% board giving. So nonprofit financials are different. We operate on accrual rather than cash basis, and very often we have very few revenue sources, and that's something that board members need to be concerned about. If we are overly dependent on government revenue or any one source, what happens when you lose that kind of funding? Budgets are a work of fiction. They're based entirely on what happened in the past. So we give it our best shot, but monitoring that budget on a monthly basis is really critical, because a lot can change in a month or two. And when you are overly dependent, particularly on government grants, the government can cancel those grants at any time. That's an agreement that they have total control over. And so when we have 3/4 of our revenue coming from a single source, it's a very dicey way to do business. We have an annual tax return that we are required to file. It's the 990. The 990 and the audit, if the organization is large enough to do an audit, should be presented to you as board members. Your names as board members are on the 990. And there is also a question that says, have board members reviewed the 990? And I have this theory that there are two piles in the IRS offices, the pile where it says, yes, board members have reviewed, and the pile where it says, no, they haven't. And the IRS has made it very clear, and I'm sure you've all heard about the very large number of new agents that have been hired. The nonprofit sector is viewed as a vast, untapped source of revenue. The reality is quite different from that, but that's irrelevant and immaterial. So there is clearly a concerted effort to audit nonprofit financials much more closely than they've done in the past. And there's also been a movement for a number of years where Congress has said they were really considering doing away with the philanthropic deduction. Does that matter to a lot of people? Probably not, but it really does matter to some of our big donors. So these are the financial statements you should be looking for. It's a statement of financial position, and that's the balance sheet. And what is particularly important for you to look at is funds that are restricted or unrestricted, that the money that we really like to receive is unrestricted. That means it is not tied to any particular program or activity. What often happens is that nonprofit board members will look at the bottom line of a financial statement for a nonprofit, and they'll say, wow, this is great. We've got 6 or 7 figures in the bank. The reality is perhaps 95% of that is restricted, which means it can't be used to pay salaries. It can't be used to pay the rent or to purchase equipment. It has to be used for a particular program. There's some money that you can't afford. The statement of activities or the income statement, again, with and without donor restriction. The differentiation between restricted and unrestricted funds is relatively new in terms of the Financial Accounting Standing Board, or the FASBs. And the new financial reports in the new 990s are looking a bit different with this very clear differentiation. Your statement of cash flows. What kind of situation is the organization in? Do they have a reserve? It's recommended that a nonprofit have 5 to 6 months cash in reserve, so that if an unexpected loss of funding occurs, a major donor doesn't give this year, an event is canceled. And we certainly experienced that during COVID, where many nonprofits depend on events as a major source of revenue. And when they were forced to suddenly cancel them, that could have caused loss of a third or even a half of their income. Not a good position to be in, but that was definitely the case. And then finally, the statement of functional expenses, which is a different statement probably for many of you, where revenue has to be allocated according to program administrative or overhead and fundraising. So money is not what it appears to be in a nonprofit financial statement. And the other thing that's important for you to be aware of is that in many cases, government grants are really not grants. They are what we call fee for services. So I may get a $400,000 quote grant from the federal government to offer English as a second language. That means that I have to provide those services first. I have to deliver those classes. I have to buy the materials. I have to hire the staff. And then I have to submit my proof of payment in order to be reimbursed. And in many instances, the state and federal funding runs 90, 120 days without reimbursement. And so that's where cash flow becomes really critical. Can you really afford this grant? That a line of credit is an important financial statement for a benefit for a nonprofit. Talked about restricted versus unrestricted. Restricted funds are for a particular use, typically a program, and they can't be used for anything else. Unrestricted funds, those are the funds that come from events. Those are the funds that come from major donors, unless the donor has put a restriction on it from a foundation. We often refer to the nonprofit starvation cycle, where I've had more than a few conversations with board members who say, well, nonprofits can't make a profit. Well, absolutely, we can make a profit. That's good business. How can we continue to operate if we aren't generating more revenue than we absolutely need? And for decades, I think there has been that idea that nonprofits should not pay their staff sufficiently. They should be in old, dingy, falling down businesses. They should be using secondhand equipment. And for many years, that's been true. But more and more, we're recognizing that how can we treat our clients with respect if we don't treat our organizations respectfully? It's kind of an interesting conversation. Part of your job as a board member is to manage risk. We have insurance that is really important to our well-being. Business interruption, that's one that a lot of organizations didn't think of until COVID. I wouldn't serve on a board that did not have director and officer liability insurance. Nonprofits get sued all the time. D&O does not keep you from getting sued, but it will pay your legal expenses. As attorneys, you should appreciate the value of that. Workman's comp, it's not required in the state of Texas, but it's important to know whether you are offering that. General liability, some of these are what I will call fancy insurance, errors in admission, event cancellation. Again, that was one that a lot of organizations did not have and wished they had. And then cyber liability is one that is growing in probably importance. It is not inexpensive and it has a lot of contingencies. So that's the kind of thing where, as a board member, I'd want our insurance provider or insurance agent to come in probably at least once a year and do a presentation to the board so I could ask my questions about the kind of coverage we have. Do we have enough? Should we be adding coverage? It's become more and more complex. And again, as attorneys, you are number one on everyone's list when they are starting a nonprofit organization, because we recognize the importance of having your wisdom and your insight. Your job, again, as the fiduciaries for the organization, you want to be sure that there are strong internal controls in place and that policies and procedures are clear and readily available. That we talk a lot about succession planning. There are many nonprofit organizations who have very long-serving executive directors or CEOs, people that have been there for 20 or 30 years, and everything is in their head. And if something happens to one of them, the organization is suddenly in a crisis mode because they really don't know how things happen. They don't know what the operations are that need to carry the organization forward. They don't know who the funders are. So again, are there strong policies and procedures in place, and are they readily available? HR is the #1 reason that nonprofit organizations get sued: harassment, discrimination, failure to meet ADA requirements. So again, as that objective outsider, that governor of the organization, you want to be sure that you are following the rules. Charity watchdog organizations are probably the second place the public goes to learn more about a nonprofit organization. The website would probably be the first place. Charity Navigator is undoubtedly the most common resource that an individual might search for an organization. If you're thinking about being a board member for a particular organization, I would absolutely encourage you to see what their status is on one of these rating agencies. The Charity Navigator rates nonprofits based on their 990, so it's all about their financials. I think it's a 4-star is the best you can get, and there's not much you can do about it if you don't have 4 stars. Improve your financials. The Wise Giving Alliance or the Better Business Bureau. Many organizations may not qualify for Better Business Bureau standards. They have approximately 22 criteria that an organization has to meet. And the fact that a nonprofit doesn't meet all 22 doesn't mean they're a bad organization. It simply means they don't meet the BBB standards. Just a point of information, getting the BBB approval is free. Being able to use the Better Business Bureau logo on your materials, there is a fee associated with that. So again, just because you don't see the Better Business Bureau logo on a nonprofit's website or in their materials doesn't mean they're not BBB approved. And if they are not, it doesn't mean they're a bad organization. Candid is an organization formerly known as GuideStar. They provide 3 years of every nonprofit's 990. So if you're interested in serving on the board of a nonprofit, or you want to learn more about the competition, let's say you're working on a homeless organization, maybe you're with Salvation Army, and you want to know what Search is doing, or you want to know what Star of Hope is doing, you can just go on Candid and look up the organization and review their 990s. Candid has recently created a rating system. I think it's silver, platinum, and gold. And that has a little more flexibility in terms of meeting their criteria. So again, if you are serving on a board, I would encourage you to be sure that your various descriptors are up to speed and that they're as good as they can be, so that you're providing the very best face for the public as they're trying to learn more about the organization. It is the board's responsibility to develop the board. Again, when you're being recruited for a board, sometimes it's really flattering if somebody asks you to serve on the board of directors, and so you feel really uncomfortable asking questions. But board service is a two-way street. It has to be a good fit for you, and it has to be a good fit for the organization. Sometimes it takes several months to go through that recruitment process. If an organization meets on the 3rd Tuesday of the month and you have a standing staff meeting on that day, you're not going to be a good board member because you won't be able to attend meetings. If the financial commitment is higher than you anticipate, the last time I checked, I think the financial commitment for the symphony, for example, was $15,000 or $20,000. Well, if that's really not what you have in mind, you want to be sure you understand what that commitment is. What do you have to serve on a committee? Do you have to attend events? Those are all questions that you want to ask before you make that commitment to the organization. And if you're not really passionate about the mission of an organization, if you don't like dogs and cats, I don't think you'd be a really good board member for the SPCA. You'd have a hard time selling it to other people. If you're uncomfortable with children, you probably wouldn't want to be a member of the board of the Collaborative for Children. So again, really understand what your passion is, what you're interested in, before you begin to make that commitment. And board orientation is really important. That's a process that really prepares you to have a good understanding of the work of the organization and to really be able to promote the work of the organization with others. So that would probably involve introductions to all the staff, to other board members, an overview of all the programs, perhaps observing one of the programs, maybe attending a board meeting before you actually commit to becoming an elected board member. And then we think it's a good practice to evaluate the board's performance annually. I really recommend SurveyMonkey confidential online survey where you can go through and really let the board chair and the executive director and your fellow board members know, how's it going? Do I feel that my skills are being used here? Are the meetings productive? Do the committees make sense? What could be done to improve our board experience? It's a really simple way to make sure that you are in a continuous improvement mode when you're serving on that board of directors. So I mentioned the diversifying boards, the need to make sure that boards reflect the community that they're serving. As you undoubtedly know, Houston is probably the most diverse city in the United States. We are one of the very few that has a nearly even distribution among African American, Hispanic, and Asian. We have a very large and growing Middle Eastern population. So when you look at the composition of nonprofit boards and compare it with the current population of the United States, it doesn't match up very well. These are recent census figures. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to diversifying our boards. United Way has a program called Project Blueprint. Perhaps you've heard of it. It is a program in which we prepare members of our ethnic communities to serve on nonprofit boards. It is an application process. We encourage any of you who might be eligible to participate to consider joining Project Blueprint. We go through a series of 10 weeks of courses that are in-depth overview of board responsibilities. They are taught by experts in the field. As a matter of fact, this afternoon, we have the head of Deloitte's governance program who is going to talk to our current Project Blueprint class about roles and responsibilities. So it's a very in-depth, expanded bit based compared with what we're doing here this afternoon. It is really essential that we do a better job of making our boards diverse. And Project Blueprint is a really good start that I often hear from folks who say, well, we don't really know anybody. Well, step into my office. I can make those connections for you. And that's our commitment to our Project Blueprint classes, our cohorts, that as soon as they graduate, we connect them with a board opportunity that matches their skills and passions. And we have more than 1,000 graduates now. So again, if any of you are interested, I'd love to give you more information about that. Meetings, oh my goodness. I once did a board retreat with a nonprofit whose primary complaint was that their average board meeting was 5 or 6 hours. That's really quite astonishing. I can't imagine a board meeting that should take more than 90 minutes. An hour, maybe not quite enough time, but a couple of strategies are to use a consent agenda where you can bundle non-voting items, the minutes, the finances, committee reports, and use a timed agenda and appoint somebody at each meeting to act as a timekeeper. So when discussion goes over on a particular topic, you can say, wait a minute, folks, we're at time. Do you want to end the discussion here and make a decision? Do you want to carry it over to the next meeting? What's your pleasure? But you have somebody who is actually monitoring the time. There are lots of good programs now that can put your financials into a dashboard. So again, it doesn't require a lot of discussion. You can say, oh, green, looks like those things are going well. Yellow, maybe we're running into a few problems here. Red, uh-oh, that's what we really need to be talking about. Minutes, you are attorneys, as you well know, less is more when it comes to minutes. I'm fascinated when I see organizational minutes that are pages and pages and pages, and he said this and she said that, and they had an argument over such and such. And that's rather terrifying. If there were ever some sort of a legal issue, those minutes could be deadly. And so we really encourage folks to pay attention to. You need to know who was there, what the votes were, who voted, what the decision was, when the next meeting is. It can be pretty basic. Nonprofits need to be looking at strategy. That all too often we find ourselves falling into operations. Operations are what happens every day, the day-to-day work of the organization. it's not strategic, it's not important. And yet that's easy. We know how to do that. It's a little harder to focus on strategy. It's a good idea to do board development on a regular basis, to bring somebody in to talk about board roles and responsibilities, especially if you have a cohort of new board members, to provide a bit of board education, what's going on in our particular sector. So homelessness is an industry. Education is an industry. After school care is an industry. And so board members need to understand how their particular organization compares to others in the industry. So think about it. If you were asked to serve on the board of Wells Fargo Bank, you would probably spend a lot of time trying to understand the banking industry and what their issues and concerns and opportunities were right now. You would read everything you could get your hands on about Wells Fargo, and they undoubtedly would be sending you ample information to prepare you for your board service. In our world, we tend to forget that we are a business and that we are an industry. And so how is Star of Hope different from the Beacon? How is the Beacon different from New Hope Housing? What is Salvation? What is unique about the Salvation Army? Those are all nonprofits in the homeless industry, and there are probably over 100 organizations that provide homeless services. So how do we determine whether this is really an effective organization? Board meetings should not end unless there is a clear understanding of who's going to do what between now and the next meeting. When we just walk away, everyone always says, "Oh, I'm glad to help. Yeah, I'll help anytime. Just let me know what I need to do." But nobody ever says what you need to do, and so you do nothing. And you can't be criticized for that. This is not your work. This is not the field that you are in. And so unless somebody explains to you what needs to be done, it's perfectly reasonable to assume you don't know. And I like to, at the end of every meeting, just do sort of a plus minus what worked for this meeting, what didn't work for this meeting, what can we do to improve so that everyone has a better experience in the next meeting. Board minutes, again, your attorneys, I don't need to tell you this, but the actual minimal details, not who said what, names are only for motions and second, review. There are different opinions about whether you should record or not record. In some cases, if there is detailed discussion, it's helpful to go back and listen to the recording to be sure you didn't miss anything. But if you do that, then be sure that you edit. Make sure they're readily accessible, and the minutes of the last meeting are really a good foundation for preparing the agenda for the next meeting. So what gets in the way of board effectiveness? Micromanagement is one of the big issues that, as I said, your role as board members is strategy. Strategy is, what's the future look like? Is this organization sustainable? That to get involved in the day-to-day. As a board, you have one employee, and that is the nonprofit executive director or CEO. All other staff issues and management happens through the executive director. So nonprofit boards have a tendency sometimes to get involved with staff issues, and yet that is not their purview at all. The board needs to be constantly refreshed. So if your nominating process is doing nothing but reaffirming the people that are already there, that's really not thinking about the future and how what the future will look like after you're long gone. Really not paying any attention to or failing to understand your fiduciary and legal responsibilities. We've gone over those. When you don't have a strategic plan, it's like not having a map or not using your GPS when you're headed for a new destination. If you don't know where you're going, any place will do. And all too often, that's how we run our nonprofits. That, if you keep on doing what you're doing and get the same results, that is not an optimal strategy. And then we can fire board members. That very often there is a reluctance to do that. They might be big donors. They might have been founding board members. Maybe they've been there for a long time. And we say to ourselves, well, we can't really let Bill go because he's really generous, and what we would do without him. You create another structure of a president's council or an emeritus council where we can thank those who have been involved in the organization, who have really supported the organization in a major way, but we need to move them on. If they're not serving the purpose that they were there for, it's time to let them go. And that is it for my quick overview of nonprofit board roles and responsibilities. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
We have one question in the chat.
Okay.
What
let's see.
duty? Do you want me to read it to you, or?
Yeah, so what duty do board members have to ensure financial viability in the future, including saving money versus spending the money that raised for that year? Assume no. It really is, as long as the decision, the financial decisions are legitimate. In other words, you're not being frivolous, spending money for unnecessary programs. So something that doesn't happen often in the nonprofits are what I would call a cost benefit assessment. And I think it's important for board members from time to time, not to get involved in the day-to-day operation of the program, but to really be looking at the program statistics. So do we have more or fewer clients than we did last year? What is inflation doing to the cost of providing this service? What is the competition doing? Are there other organizations providing the same service? And perhaps we could partner with them and they could do this part of it and we could do that part of it. If there are, it really is a matter of determining how that spending affects the strategic direction that the board has established. So if part of your goal, for example, is to expand the facility or to purchase a facility, then that would be a decision regarding saving money. And if you feel that that kind of a recommendation is really extreme and it is not responsible, then you would determine that you were not going to spend money in that way. And this is probably something that you as attorneys say all the time. The answer is it depends. And that is, but I would say that the leadership preference would probably be my first answer. The legal duty is that you make good decisions. What those good decisions are is really based on your research, your thought, your study of the matter, your evaluation of the needs of the organization, the relevance of the mission. That's a long answer. Does that help at all? All right, let's see what else we have here. Okay. So I don't see another question. Is that correct? And Daniel, you were going to put oh, you've got it there. There's the MCLE number.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions, and I'm going to hand it off to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent
Stop sharing my
presentation.
screen. So you should be good to share your screen now.
Excellent. So thank you all for hanging in there. So this is now kind of the end of the CLE. So I'm going to talk about kind of, you know, my day job. So I'm in the professional liability section of Thompson Co. An increasing percentage of my business, especially through the pandemic years, as this has really just blossomed. And Ronnie said earlier, nonprofits get sued all the time. So I spend a lot of my time now representing nonprofit directors and officers. You know, they've been accused of any number of unsavory activities. It kind of is the classic, you know, you can be accused of anything and you can be sued by anyone at any time, regardless of what the actual facts and evidence are. Okay, so I'm going to figure out how to share screen here. Okay. So the presentation that I've called for our ethics case study here today, this is No Good Deed Goes Unpunished. So as Ronnie had mentioned, you know, nonprofit boards love recruiting their directors and officers from the professional trades. They love having, you know, especially small ones, lawyers, accountants, doctors, anybody really with kind of a professional certification or license. any kind of advanced schooling. MBAs are in high demand also. These nonprofit boards are looking for working board members. So they want to have diversity of opinions, diversity of life experiences, diversity of education. You usually do not want to have all lawyers on your board because there are going to be some accounting issues. There's going to be some other stuff that comes up. Okay, so I mean, the one thing that usually nonprofit DNOs are going to have in common is that they went through their schooling, they obtained their licensure, and they see some area, something in the community that they really they want to address it, and they want to use their time, their energy, and even their money to give back to the community and try and solve this problem. So I give a full presentation on this. This is really just kind of boiled down to this is about a 5-minute ethics case study. Early next year, I'm going to be presenting a full one where we take a look at nonprofit DNO claims and litigation, and that's kind of an update. I usually do an annual update on that for CLEs. So that if you have any interest based on what we're talking about, stay tuned on the HYLF CLE calendar. We're definitely going to add that one. Okay. So in times of need, especially going through the pandemic, which was difficult for a lot of people and difficult on a lot of specific communities, it's no surprise that while nonprofits get sued all the time, nonprofits are now getting sued more and more just because a lot of people just demographically kind of had a difficult time in the pandemic. And that is why these lawsuits spike. It was the exact same thing from the 2008 crisis. I mean, the exact same thing then happened at the very beginning of the pandemic, and there are now these kind of lingering issues and complications just because certain segments of society did not bounce back quickly and are in fact way worse off currently than they were before the pandemic. The presentation, the ethics case study is coming from, it's a 2018 ethics opinion. Okay, so people who want to give back, this is an area, it's come up for at least, first time I heard about something like this was way over 10 years ago. That was 15 years ago, actually. That was the first time I heard about that. So for our case study, we have this law firm called Heart O' Gold. It is organized as a 501c3 public charity nonprofit law firm that is headquartered in, and it is for the residents of Fifth Ward. This Heart of Gold law firm LLP only provides a limited scope representation to civil pro se litigants who earn too much money to qualify for pro bono legal aid, like through Lone Star or use of volunteer lawyers. But these people earn too little money to afford a traditional private lawyer at $350 an hour or whatever that goes for these days. So this is kind of the unique segment. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as low bono, LOW bono. It is a very underserved area just because they're in a very difficult position that, they with federal poverty guidelines of the grants, they may earn something like 350% of federal poverty guidelines. So they're not eligible for any of the grant funded pro bono legal aid. And just there's no realistic way to come up with a $5,000 retainer to go hire a private lawyer. That's just to say that these are people who are basically pro se in civil cases because there really are not many other options for people like that. And that is a growing and a very expanding subset of people, especially in Texas. So when we meet Heart of Gold Law Firm, business has been slow for them. Even though, it is organized as 501c3 public charity nonprofit law firm, they still have bills for Westlaw. They still have rent coming due for the office space. And the board is going to meet tomorrow to vote on a proposal to directly solicit potential pro se litigants to drum up new business. So that's the problem that we have. If anybody would like to come on and talk live, put your camera on talk, y'all feel free to. This if you want to talk, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, I can just tell you what my thoughts are. I think this is a very interesting case study. When I talk about this with people, it usually upsets people a lot because so the premise that we're starting off with is this is just a public charity nonprofit law firm trying to help people. And so when we talk about what the outcome is, people get a little upset about that. They think that this is not the right decision, even though that's what the 2018 ethics opinion is. So let's kind of talk about how it got decided and what some of the issues are. So over the years, I've had to update this. It's a 2018 ethics opinion. Rules got changed in 21. So this is the updated version. If you've seen the presentation in the past, you've seen the references and the comments are a little different, but still the same outcome. So Rule 703 of Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct. A lawyer shall not solicit through in-person contact or through regulated telephone, social media, or other electronic contact, professional employment from a non-client unless the target of the solicitation is another lawyer, a person who has a family, close personal or prior business or professional relationship with the lawyer, or a person who is known by the lawyer to be an experienced user of the type of legal services involved for business matters. So when we take a look at Rule 703, that's it's probably not looking so good for what the law firm is doing. However, when you refer, so it's comment 1 to 703 refers you back to Rule 701. Rule 701 provides that a solicitation communication is a communication substantially motivated by pecuniary gain. The way most people are going to read that, and this is where people usually start to get upset in the analysis, they focus on substantially motivated, and so they're thinking, this is a 501c3. They're not trying to turn a $500 an hour profit. They are trying to basically help people, so everything should be okay with it, right? However, the full sentence is substantially motivated by pecuniary gain. So this is where we get to what the general answer is. And if y'all want to have commentary on it, I would love for y'all to get involved, unmute yourself, start talking. Providing legal services even on a reduced fee, and that's where the rub is. Below market or flat rate fee basis is no indication that a significant motive for the solicitation is not for the lawyer's pecuniary gain. And that's where we kind of started off is there's a rent bill coming due. There's a Westlaw bill coming due. There are some salaries to be paid. There is a pecuniary gain, the way that this was analyzed when the ethics opinion was published in 2018. So what the general kind of final answer is, just based on the limited amount of the hypothetical that we put in front of you on this. Pursuant to Rule 703B, lawyers may not solicit the prospective clients, non-clients, when the significant motive for the lawyers doing so is the pecuniary gain, even if it is a modest amount. And then, of course, there's always the it depends kind of situation. When you go back and read the rules, if it is a family member, that makes it something different. If there's a past or present attorney-client relationship, that makes it something different. If the people being solicited are not true strangers, that they're actually members of the qualified nonprofit organization to which the law firm belongs, that is not as bad as what the outcome of the ethics opinion. And that kind of the most interesting part of this, is there any pecuniary gain objective? So there's ways you can kind of plan around it if you have the heart of gold and not trying to get into trouble that they did with the ethics opinion in 2018. All right, so beyond that, stop sharing. All right, are there any questions in the chat? Scroll here. Anybody have any opinions about the ethics case study that they want to talk about? All right, well, I will say thank you all very much for joining us here. We've been looking forward to this topic for quite some time. It was an excellent presentation by Ronnie. I'm so glad that you all were here and able to join us. If y'all came in after we started the kind of initial portion, we basically just kind of reintroduced ourselves. So Miriam and I are the co-chairs of the Houston Young Lawyers Foundation Fellows Committee this bar year. What our plan is for the year is to present a number of CLEs and really expand the CLE program. If y'all had seen some of the prior bar years, usually that there were 2, 3, 4. Our plan is to present a lot more. So this is the first one of the year that we had Ronnie speak at. We have one of our fellow trustees on HYLF, Amy Farish from Yetter Coleman, is going to be presenting October 17th at our second CLE. So that is on pro bono services and different opportunities, different ways to get involved, as well as whether you're a junior associate at a firm trying to get more involved or just trying to find new opportunities in the community. We have a number of different presentations. We don't have exact dates for yet, but Ben Ritz, another one of our trustees, is going to be presenting on insurance coverage dealing with human trafficking events at hotels, restaurants. That is going to be an excellent topic. I'm going to be speaking on nonprofit D&O professional liability cases. So rather than just the ethics portion, we'll talk about why these claims have increased so much, what the claims and litigation space is looking like for that. Beyond that, Miriam, any parting words you'd like to leave everybody with?
Well, thank you for such a great CLE presentation. We're glad Ronnie was able to come back. She's spoken for years at different HYLF and HYLF trainings, and we hope to have her back again next year. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone here take on their various leadership roles with HYLA and HYLF. That I see a lot of people from our boards as well as committee chairs. So please do reach out to Daniel or I if you're interested in getting involved. If there's anything that y'all are interested in particular in presenting on as well, we'd love to have a conversation about putting a CLE on with your area of expertise.
Definitely. And we put the MCLE number in the chat. We'll give you all a minute to copy paste that so you can get your credit for today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'm more than happy to talk about the work we're doing on the HYLF Fellows Committee this bar year. I'm super excited about it. I have an amazing partner working with Miriam on it this year. Besides that, we hope we see you all again at the other CLEs. So thank you again for joining us and hope you all have a great rest of the day.